Khadija and Cindy for those very, very generous introductions. New year has come. We're in 2016. I don't know about you, but I think maybe it's time to make some history. What do you think? I kind of think that maybe we've had enough of establishment politics and establishment economics. I kind of think we need a political revolution. I'm getting a little bit tired of seeing our government run by billionaires and corporate interests and folks who contribute hundreds of millions of dollars into the political process. And I've got a radical idea that maybe, just maybe, we should create a government that works for the working families of this country, not just the top 1%. Politics in this day and age gets kind of dumb. And if you look at the Republican process there, their primaries and stuff, my God, it gets really dumb. So what we are trying to do in this campaign, and I know this is another really radical idea, is actually treat the American people as if they were intelligent human beings. And let me begin by telling you a little bit about myself and my family. I studied economics a bit in college, but the truth is that the most profound economic lesson that I learned was when I was a little kid. And I was a little kid growing up in a 3.5-room rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn, New York. My dad was a paint salesman. He never made much money. He came to the United States from Poland at the age of 17. We were never poor, but we just never had a whole lot of money. And what I learned growing up in a lower middle-class family is what the stress of not having money does to a family. And we don't think about it too much. We just accept it the way it is. But when you don't have a lot of money, every decision the family makes, do you buy this? Do you go there? Can you go to that school? Every decision is a torturous decision because you're dealing with limited resources. That's the lesson that I learned growing up. And that's the lesson today that exists in millions and millions of households throughout this country. So the main point of this campaign is to ask all of us to think big, not to think small, to understand that in our country today, we are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We are not a poor nation. And if we are the wealthiest country in the history of the world, how does it happen that we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major nation on earth? How does that happen? How does it happen that half of the children in public schools today are on free or reduced lunch programs? How does it happen that elderly people in my state, in your state, are trying to survive on $13,000 a year, $12,000 a year Social Security, and are cutting their prescription drug pills in half because they don't have enough money to buy the medicine they need? How does it happen that mom and dad are going to go to work on Monday and they're worried about the quality of child care that they're sending their kids to because they can't afford good quality, affordable child care? How does it happen that despite a huge increase in worker productivity as a result of an exploding technology, how does it happen that median family income today is $4,000 less than it was in 1999. How does it happen that in my state, in your state, people are working 2 or 3 jobs just to bring in enough income and health care to take care of the family? How does it happen that millions of single moms are trying to make it on 10 or 11 bucks an hour and are getting paid 79 cents on the dollar compared to men? They're trying desperately to bring up their kids with dignity, and in many cases, they're falling further and further behind. So the mantra of this campaign is that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, when we stand together, when we don't allow the Trumps and others of the world to divide us up as to whether or not we were born in Mexico or born in the United States, whether we're Muslim or whether we are Christian or Jews, when we stand together as a people and have the courage to take on the billionaire class whose greed is destroying this country, when we have that courage, my friends, and this I mean from the bottom of my heart, when we are prepared to say to the 1%, you cannot have it all. You cannot have it all. You're not going to get huge tax breaks when children in this country go hungry. You're not going to continue to ship our jobs abroad when people in this country desperately need good paying jobs. We say to the CEOs of the large corporations, sorry, you're not going to continue to cut the wages and health care benefits and pensions of your workers, and then you end up with compensation packages 300 times larger than the average worker in your company. Ain't gonna happen anymore. When we began this campaign about 8.5 months ago, a lot of the professionals, and the pundits, and the media said, well, you know, Bernie Sanders is an interesting guy, and he combs his hair really nicely. A GQ dresser. But nonetheless, he ain't going to become president because, you know, who in America actually believes that we should make a political revolution? He's not going to become president because, you know, in this day and age, it takes a lot of money to run a national campaign. And Bernie Sanders has said he does not want the money of the billionaires in corporate America because he doesn't represent their interests. If you don't have a super PAC and you don't beg the rich and the powerful in corporate America for campaign funds, how can you do that? Well, we decided to do something pretty simple and straightforward. And that is to say to the middle class and working families of this country that if we want real change, we've got to stand together. Our campaign needs your help. And then an amazing, absolutely amazing thing happened, and I could not have predicted it in a million years. And that is, as of today, we have received more individual campaign contributions than any campaign in the history of the United States. And here is the extraordinary thing. You know, a lot of politicians take real pride and say, wow, I went to dinner last night, I brought back $3 million. Or I got $5 million. Jeb Bush apparently got a $10 million check from some Wall Street guy the other day. And that's what these guys boast about. You know what I boast about? You know what moves me very deeply? Our average contribution is $27. What you are looking at is a people's campaign of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's why we're going to win this election. It is not only that we have received more individual contributions than anybody in American history at this point in the campaign. It's that we have hundreds of thousands of wonderful volunteers in every state in this country, including many, many thousands here in Iowa. And just before I walked in here, I met with a number of people who are actively involved in the campaign, and you got 4 or 5 wonderful high school kids who are working hard on this campaign. Right there. But it's not only young people. You know, we have had meetings just like this all over the state of Iowa, all over New Hampshire, all over America. We have now brought out to meetings just like this close to 450,000 Americans. In this state of Iowa, we have brought out some 35,000 people to meetings like this. The reason I am confident that we are going to win here in Iowa is precisely because of the grassroots effort that these young people and people all over the state are doing. I think the word has gone out, and people now understand that given the enormous problems facing this country, it is just too late for the same old type of politics and economics. When we talk about campaigns, let me mention an issue that's out there. And that is, my opponent, Secretary Clinton, says, you know, before you go out to vote, you have got to consider the electability of the candidates. Now, can that candidate win a general election? Damn right! Secretary Clinton is exactly right. That is an enormously important issue, because I hope that there's nobody in this room who wants to see one of these right-wing extremists occupy the White House. We have got to beat right-wing Republican extremism. So the question is, who is the stronger candidate to do that? Well, not me, us. to a friend who says, well, you know, I like Bernie, he's a nice guy, his ideas are good, but he's just not electable, tell him these things. Number one, the last significant national poll, which had Hillary Clinton running against Trump and me running against Trump, had me defeating Trump by almost twice the margin that she was at. Just a few hours ago, the poll that was released in New Hampshire. This is just New Hampshire numbers. And they asked the folks in New Hampshire, which is a fairly typical state, they said, okay, look at Sanders versus the Republicans, look at Clinton versus the Republicans. Here are the results. You all want the results? Sanders beats Jeb Bush by 12 points. Clinton beats him by 6. Sanders beats Ben Carson by 19. Clinton beats him by 11. Sanders defeats our good friend Ted Cruz by 20 points. Hillary Clinton defeats him by 8 points. Sanders defeats Marco Rubio by 14 points. Hillary Clinton beats him by 3 points. And I must confess to you, here is my favorite one. My dear, dear friend Donald. Sanders beats Trump in New Hampshire by 20 points. Clinton beats him by 14. One poll, or other polls can say different things, but here is the point. The point is not only have a number of polls, not just these, shown us stronger against Republicans than Secretary Clinton, there's another factor that is even more important. And that is Republicans win elections when people are demoralized, when they are disillusioned, and when they don't come out to vote. And a perfect example of that is what happened a little over a year ago, when the Republicans won a huge, huge victory at a time when 63% of the American people didn't vote, 80% of young people didn't vote, and about 75% of low-income working class people did not vote. I believe that anybody who objectively looks at the two campaigns will conclude that our campaign is the campaign that has the energy, that has the enthusiasm, and that it is our campaign that can create a very large increase in the voter turnout, which will enable us to retain the White House, regain the Senate, do well in the House, and win governor's chairs all over America. Is enormously important, and we are the campaign that's going to win this election. Now, the reason I think that we have been so successful, I want you all to remember that when we began this campaign, we were taking on a candidate who was one of the best-known people in our country, if not the world. And yet when we began, I think it's probably fair to say that here in Iowa, 75–80% of people didn't even know who Bernie Sanders was, let alone what I stood for. But we have come an enormous distance over the last 8 months. And I think the reason for that is we are talking not about the same old political games and silliness that has gone on for so long, but we are talking about the real issues that impact the American people. And we're providing the ideas to bring real change to the American people. So let me touch on some of those issues that we as a nation must deal with. And at the top of my list, and I'm glad that we have forced discussion on this issue, is the outrageous and grotesque level of income and wealth inequality. Today in America, the top 1/10% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Today in America, the 20 wealthiest people own more wealth than the bottom half of America, 150 million people. Today in America, one family, the Walton family of Walmart, one family owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of the American people. Today in America, while folks are working 2 or 3 jobs, while mom works, dad works, the kids are working, 58% of all new income created today goes to the top 1%. Goes to the top 1%. And that is why our first and major order of business is to create an economy, decent wages, decent jobs, that work for working families, not just a handful of billionaires. But it is closer to 10%, and that youth unemployment is off the charts for kids who have graduated high school. So it seems to me that when millions of our people are unemployed or underemployed, the federal government must pass a massive jobs program to put our people back to work. And that means creating millions of jobs by rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. That means hiring teachers, not firing teachers. That means hiring millions of workers to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel energy efficiency. There is more than enough work to be done in this country. Our job is to make sure that workers are going out there, that we create the jobs to do that work. When we talk about the economy, it is clear to almost all Americans that wages in this country are much, much too low, that the federal minimum wage carried by many states of $7.25 an hour is a starvation wage, that we've got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. And then when we talk about equitable wages, we are also talking about pay equity for women workers. meant for men. That's old-fashioned sexism. We have got to change that. Raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And if we establish pay equity for women, I want you to think, again, about those millions of single moms who are the bravest people that one can imagine. Beyond my comprehension, how one person alone without a lot of money can raise kids. They deserve our support. Raise that minimum wage, and when we have pay equity, millions of moms will now be able to raise their kids with security and dignity, and that's what we've got to do. You know, here in Iowa, you see, I think it is fair to say, a lot of politicians, right? You stumble over politicians. Go out to get a cup of coffee and there's somebody running for president. You can't run away from it. Among many of my Republican colleagues, you hear them talking about family values, how much they love families. You stay up nights just worrying about your families. What all of you know is that when Republicans talk about family values, what they are really saying is that no woman in this room, no woman in this state, no woman in this country have the right to control her own body. I disagree. Just talk a little bit about hypocrisy. Not that you would be shocked that politicians engage in hypocrisy, but here is kind of the uppermost example of hypocrisy. My Republican colleagues go around the country and they say, we hate government. Government is terrible. We have got to cut Social Security and maybe privatize it. We got to cut Medicare or voucherize it. Got to cut Medicaid, cut education, cut the EPA. Government is awful. It is terrible. Get government out of our lives. Except if you are a woman having to make a very difficult and personal decision. Then they love the government and want the government to make that decision for the women of this country. We will oppose that vigorously. By the way, our Republican friends who hate government and want to get government off of our backs are ever so curious about what happens in the bedrooms of America. And they want to make certain that our gay brothers and sisters do not have the right to marry. I disagree. We have come too far as a nation, fighting against bigotry and fighting against discrimination, to go backwards. We are going forwards. And when we talk about an economic system which is rigged, when we talk about folks whose greed, whose recklessness, and whose illegal behavior helped destroy our economy and brought about the worst recession since the 1930s, we are talking about Wall Street. I work in Washington, D.C., and I see power at play. And I see the drug companies, and I see the military-industrial complex, and I see all of the powerful corporate interests. But at the top of that pyramid, at the top of that pyramid is Wall Street, who have unlimited resources, unlimited amounts of political power and economic power. Now, as all of you know, Wall Street spent billions of dollars in lobbying and campaign contributions to get deregulated. And what they were saying is, allow us to be free and to do what we want to do, allow us to get government out of regulating us, and look at what we will do. Well, we saw what they did. And what they did was to destroy our economy through their greed and their illegal behavior. Now, it turns out, this is really quite amazing, that we bailed out Wall Street because the big banks were too big to fail. Well, guess what? Today, 3 out of the 4 largest banks in this country are much bigger than they were when we bailed them out because they were too big to fail. Now, in my view, when you have big banks that are bigger, when you have 6 financial institutions in this country, 6, that issue 2/3 of the credit cards and 1/3 of the mortgages, when a handful of CEOs have that much economic and political power, we have got to reestablish Glass-Steagall legislation and more importantly, I know that if Teddy Roosevelt, that good Republican 100 years ago, were here today, he would say, break them up, and he would be right. Financial system which provides affordable loans to small and medium-sized businesses so we can create decent-paying jobs. We don't need a financial system which is an island unto itself, only concerned about their profits. So if elected president, we have a process which within 1 year will break up the largest financial institutions in this country. There are many, many issues of enormous consequence facing our nation, but there is one issue which impacts every other issue. And that is that as a result of the disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United, our campaign finance system has become corrupt and American democracy is being undermined.